This is Radio Logic, the show about digital identities, the people behind it, the tech behind it, and in each episode we'll cover what works, what doesn't, and what's next. Let's dig into it. Identity is not an IT function anymore. It's the essence of any cyber security or security architecture. I'm joined today by Simon Moffatt from the Cyber Hut. Welcome, Simon.
Hi, Anders. Good to be here.
I'm looking forward to discuss how identity is really at the center of security.
Yeah, it is. I think in the modern day world, security, cyber, information security does not function without identity.
So, in your view, Simon, what is the deepest structural problem that enterprises are facing today in terms of identity? Is it tool sprawl? Is it just the pace of how things are going? Data fragmentation? What is it?
And honestly, I think it's probably a combination of those, and probably some more as well. I think, if you look at what information security and cyber is there to do, it's there to protect, clearly, but it's there to identify things of risk to things of value, and that's quite a complex, difficult problem to try and achieve. And if your identity infrastructure is fragmented, leveraging classic or legacy technology, if the data sprawl or IT sprawl or identity sprawl is proliferating and not being managed, if it's not able to respond to change, external change, be that cyber threats, compliance, or business requirements, all of those things really proliferate. It's the effectiveness of what identity is there to do. And part of identity's function today is to empower those security controls, those security toolings. And that is definitely a change. That wasn't always the case 15, 20 years ago. So it's a little bit unfair. I think organizations, they do have some structural things to deal with. And it's a little bit unfair because identity wasn't built for security 15, 20, 30 years ago. It was this productivity infrastructure, possibly sitting under the sort of CIO umbrella. And obviously now it is being challenged, if you like, or certainly has more requirements to make the cyber world effective. So there are some challenges. You don't necessarily have one single one. Identity data is part of it, but I think there's a multitude of things.
But does this mean that identity is a single point of failure? I mean, given that so much is tied to identity, and that is really at the hub of everything.
It absolutely can be, and I think as well we need to think about what a single point of failure really means. And it isn't just about a system being unavailable. Your identity provider is unavailable, and that can have a real catastrophic impact on staff and customers. If you can't log in to do your work, you can have the fanciest AI systems, data lakes, data warehouses, all of that stuff ceases to function if you can't.
You can expect a call pretty quickly from someone very high up the hierarchy, right?
Exactly right. So it's almost the sort of proliferation of productivity, mean time to access, employee onboarding. So if you can't log in, that's a big deal. And I've been there in previous jobs 20 odd years ago when the Novell directory was unavailable. It happens rarely. But if you also then talk about single points of failure across the entire identity lifecycle, so also think about password reset, credential issuance. If your open policy agent or decision point is unavailable, or maybe not unavailable, perhaps is not delivering consistent responses, is not delivering fine-grained responses, high-fidelity responses. So there's lots of ways where the identity sort of capabilities can break down, and that in turn has huge impacts, not just on security, but on productivity as well.
But do you think that organizations underestimate the risk that is potentially hidden inside of these identity layers, if you will?
100%. I think if identity, traditionally was tasked to being about productivity, it's now being tasked as it sort of merges, if you like, or evolves into often reporting under the CISO, which brings different requirements, different challenges, different measurements of success. Suddenly there's a whole host of assumptions again being placed on identity, which the identity layer doesn't always deliver. So the CISOs are often thinking about the mean time to detection, dwell times, the mean time to response. Identity wasn't really in those sorts of conversations historically. How you identify attacks, respond to attacks, what should you do if you do respond, and how you should respond. So
Well, it was much more of a tactical problem in the past where you had to resolve some synchronization issue
yeah,
or some problem down that line, whereas now you actually need to apply observability on the identities and make sure that you can detect whatever behavior that users are, once they're logged in, what are they doing? How are they logging in? What's the contextual information around a user? Is that something that all companies have matured to that point yet?
I think they're getting there. I think they realise that is where they need to get to, which I think is a real sea change, even probably the last 5 or 6 years. They realise they need to observe both the identity data, so profiles, permissions, policies, how have they been changed, why have they been changed, why should we change the permissions or add access to somebody. So there's observability there, but as you mentioned, there's also observability about the usage of identities and accounts and what are they doing, why are they doing it. So I think that in itself is becoming a well-known problem, and organizations, they want to get on that journey of modernization, of being able to put identity really at the foundation of their security landscape, so they really understand what it is, what the identities are doing, where they are, what should they be doing, and have that secure running state operating end to end. So I think that's becoming more clear. I think the requirements are coming from that security world, that CISO-led world, which introduces different stakeholders, different metrics of success, different design patterns, and different requirements around what identity should be doing. And I think that's an opportunity.
And I guess historically, identity has always been someone else's problem, right? But I think now, I believe we can agree that it has moved from that sort of directory teams, infrastructural teams, into a concern that actually the CISO has on his table, given the impact that it has and the sort of tentacles that it spreads out in the organization and all tooling and everything that you're doing.
100%. I think the way I sort of look at this is, if you're looking at any sort of breach or cyber attack, generic terms here, it's the identity layer which is allowing that to take place. Now, yes, there's this sort of asymmetry between the bad guys. They don't have compliance to deal with, or infrastructure costs,
Couldn't care
personnel.
less.
They don't care. Maybe they are highly automated, effective, and got very, very sophisticated platforms. This isn't just script kiddies knocking out a few, bash scripts or whatever. So they don't have the asymmetry, but equally, that is then generating different requirements for identity, because the bad guy doesn't care about your PAM system or your IGA system, or, you've got MFA and that doesn't talk to this, and you've got a federated IDP. They want this piece of data over here, and they're going to get there. And they don't care whether they use...
Oh, they'll find a path around, right?
They will find a path, whether it's your identity or mine, or start with yours and then pivot to mine, and then lateral movement, and then snowball permissions. It's a ghost account, it's a stale account. They're not interested. They want to get through the information flow to the objective they want to do. And that, by design, I think now it is introducing different requirements, different questions on identity. And we are talking about this identity attack lifecycle. And in the old days, we're very common around, we'll check the logs, the big sort of logging mechanisms, information event monitoring. If it's in the logs, it's already happened, which is brilliant for forensics and retrospective analysis. So you've had a data breach, something bad's happened, you're looking through the logs and you suddenly find, okay, there we go. It was the administration account used on Tuesday the 5th of November. It didn't have MFA. It was at 12 o'clock at night. And that's great. It's good information, and hopefully you can improve your policies to stop that happening again. But it's in the logs. So it's done. It's done and dusted. And it could have been there for months and years and years.
It's for the CISO's memoirs later, right? You actually need that observability capability to, in real time, act upon these anomalies that occur, right? And it's kind of like policing. You don't want the police just to investigate crime and eventually find the perpetrator. You want them to actually stop the crime before it's actually happening, right?
It's a really good analogy. Absolutely right. It's once the murder's happened, absolutely,
it's too late.
You want to find the murderer, but equally you don't want murders to happen continuously. So absolutely spot on. So if you think of this attack life cycle, instead of waiting to the end, ideally you want to be finding out something before it completes. So again, mean time to detection. So using identity to identify before the attack completes. And that's going to require understanding of the identity data. And by this, we mean let's identify high-risk identities and permissions and accounts. What does that really mean from a behavior point of view? So we're already starting off from a really good point of understanding, and you can start to then understand what a high-risk account or a privileged account or a stale account or somebody who has got a different set of permissions, the impact could be much, much higher, or they certainly could be a higher risk target, for example. So absolutely spot on. You want to be identifying that risk and then observing before the bad stuff has happened.
And act when there's an observation, right? Immediately.
Exactly.
Make sure that you shut it down and deal with the problem before it becomes or blow up as a bigger problem.
Absolutely right. So you need enough evidence, enough information to be able to decide at what point should the system respond and make an active interception. It may not always be an entire sort of denial or an account disabling or whatever. It could well be something around, okay, well, the person had read and write access, but actually because of the context, perhaps they're on a public Wi-Fi or perhaps the device may have malware on it, we're going to give them read-only access for a temporary period of time, or we're going to monitor them more, or we're going to perhaps redirect them to a observation deception platform so we can actually observe their behavior before giving them access to a real system. So the responses move away from being coarse-grained to be more fine-grained, but you need the evidence, you need context and data so you can make those informed decisions. Because if you're interrupting a journey, introducing friction, you want to do that with certainty, and you need more information, essentially more data, more context to be able to do that.
Annually, Verizon gives out this breach investigation report, which I love to read because it's funny, and at the same time you cry, right?
Yeah.
Because it illustrates how much impact identity actually has to the attack surface.
Yeah.
But to that point, how do you see zero trust is being impacting this? And because there's a dimension of least privilege and identity tied into the zero trust philosophy, and it seems to be on top of everybody's mind.
It is. It's a great conversation point. Again, it's a strategy. It's a way of thinking not just about technology, but the people and process around your end-to-end security model. And absolutely, the network guys say, oh, well, we're moving the perimeter from sort of public-private networks to the person. And the interesting aspect is, if you come from an identity background, the perimeter was always the person because that's where your world was. It starts and ends with the identity downstream. So that in itself is a bit of a sea change. But there are loads of parts of the zero trust stuff from this that really relies upon identity. There's also about continuous appears in that world quite consistently. So we're talking about continuous authentication, continuous authorization, which is actually quite complicated, complex thing to achieve because it's essentially talking about stateless interactions. And what do I mean by this?
And you have to do that at scale.
At scale, and stateless is you're checking every interaction. So there is no sort of long-term session or long-term trust. Every access request, I want to check permissions, the tokens, etc., and the context associated with so. So continuous auth, continuous authorization, policy-based access control, just-in-time access. So again, you're moving away from having pre-provisioned access, permissions, groups, roles, etc., to just getting the access at a time that you need to do so, and then it's removed either using a time-based mechanism or more about context. So if your context changes and you're no longer working on a project or a Jira ticket or whatever, the access is removed. So there's a whole host of things around being continual, which requires identity. It needs identity to be operating effectively. And again, to make that work, back to your point of observation, you need to be looking at identifying a secure state, protecting that secure state, and then looking for deviation. Is there a deviation in permissions, identities, permissions and behavior, in actions, looking for differences, and then acting upon that effectively.
And speaking of the act part, we have spent time implementing shared signal framework.
Right.
Maybe you can articulate what is shared signal framework, because you have a wider lens. We see it from our point of view, but in reality, it affects more vendors.
It's a fascinating thing. I think if you think about identity historically being quite isolated, it was the identity world, and it didn't often communicate effectively with people outside of the identity world. So that would have been the sort of network, endpoint, device management, mobile world, etc. And the shared signals framework, I like to think of it's like a blanket that you can essentially throw across your entire sort of technology and infrastructure world, and it allows that bi-directional exchange of risk information. So having a foundational risk sharing world and saying, well, okay, well, I operate in the device world. I look after devices, and do you know what? We've just had an update that all Apple iOS devices have a 0-day vulnerability on them. That's useful information. That shouldn't just exist in the mobile device space. That should be proliferating where all my devices may interact with, so identity providers, the network world and other, and maybe your cyber threat intelligence world understands and finds a new threat actor, a new APT, a new sort of nation state actors emerged. These are their particular characteristics of behavior. Well, that should probably be spread around as well. So you suddenly have this sort of blanket of interactions where your identity world, your network world, your MDM and mobile world, they can all communicate and share what they deem to be of risk information to other parties, and then you can react upon it.
So it's really that sandbox with a bunch of children that all of a sudden doesn't fight over the sandcastle or
Exactly.
whatever.
Exactly. Instead of competing, it's much more complementary and much more you're sharing the information so you can make informed decisions and then obviously react accordingly.
And those are real time.
Real time. Yeah. Indeed,
I know you from the Cyber Hut. You track almost 200 vendors. What's the adoption of shared signal framework? I mean, it's a fairly new standard,
Yeah.
recently standardized, but at least I can see merit in having that, supporting that, being able to react upon signals from a wider ecosystem. All the kids in the sandbox, they need to play well with together, right?
Yeah, they do. I think this is great because it does introduce lots of non-competing organizations. I think standards are always difficult it takes a while to proliferate. They have to be designed and adopted and implemented. But I think the interesting thing about something like shared signals, it introduces different stakeholders, different parties, non-competing parties who realize that together they are stronger. And it's a cliche, but there's huge interest here, both within industry, within organizations who are looking and going, actually, do you know what? Yeah, this sort of model of sort of a publisher subscriber, the concept of bidirectional information flows is quite well understood away from shared signals and security. That pub sub model is understood. And it's like, well, okay, yeah, why are we not using this in the risk and security world? So the concept is understood. I think the more complementary vendors we have getting involved, the better. And this good interest there. For sure.
And I think the industry has changed since the both of us got involved in the security business from the first place, where a lot of the solutions to problems were kind of proprietary, and big vendors went their own way, and there was no real efforts to try to standardize. But now, I think the community of security players as a whole have adopted a sense that security is all of us problem, as opposed to we're going to solve it all.
No, 100%. I think it's, you start to pick up, go to various different conferences, things like RSA and Black Hats, they are traditional security conferences, but they are a huge percentage of identity and identity-related vendors. Research being released, Black Hat Europe is coming up in the UK imminently. There's a hell of a lot of identity-related research being released there, whether it's related to privacy, credential theft, federation, other. There's a lot of stuff there which maybe 5-8 years ago wouldn't have been the purview of a cyber conference. But now there's definitely this more of a conjoined world, if you like, of identity and cyber.
Has the cyber community adopted identity as part of a cybersecurity problem?
It's getting there.
It's
getting there for sure. I think there's two sides to this. One is, the bad guys don't care. First of all,
for sure.
So that has to be dealt with, and that has to be dealt with effectively. But I think purely from a design pattern, budget, ownership perspective, I think identity is becoming more aligned to the CISO world. The CISO is understanding that, okay, well, we've done the network thing, the data thing, the endpoint thing, and we still get breached. So what's left? It is this identity stuff, which is empowering these other technologies. So the CISO world is investing upon it. It's also introducing new requirements, new metrics of success about discovery, visibility, observability. How does your platform help and support MITRE ATT&CK? MITRE ATT&CK framework, a hell of a lot of that is based on identity, privilege access, recon, lateral movements, all this sort of stuff. So the CISO world is looking at identity now and placing new requirements upon it around data observability, cleanup, how you respond, contextual aware, and other. And you look at things like OWASP, the Open Web Application Security stuff there. Some of the top 10 that they list of the common vulnerabilities, the two which always appear in that top 10 every couple of years: broken authentication, broken access control. And they are two of the key vulnerabilities which get exploited every single day by the bad guys, and their identity problems.
I think to wrap things up, Simon, I think identity is the control plane of everything security, whether it's human or non-human. I mean, we discussed agentic AI, and as security moves beyond provisioning, joiner, mover, lever processes, etc., we need that insight, because we talked about policing, right? We need that insight, the observability of what's actually going on, and we need that to be able to act quickly when something happens. And that is really, it's not a one vendor solves it all problem. It's we need to work together to keep the bad guys out. So thank you for taking the time, Simon. It's been a pure pleasure talking to you, and as always, looking forward to the next time.
Not at all. Always a pleasure, and until next time.
Thanks for listening to Radio Logic. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.